Okay, there is hardly anything in the Bible that is just like these chapters, 12 and 11, especially like chapter 11. The word, the vision, and minute prediction are combined in a manner that is found nowhere else in the scriptures. Like I keep reading Daniel 11 and 12 through, and I'm thinking, how do I explain this? The introduction to Daniel 11 is given in the preceding chapter, which is chapter 10. And the introduction is quite extensive. All of Daniel 10 is an introduction to chapter 11. Next slide. Daniel 10 begins, in the third year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a message was revealed to Daniel, whose name was called Belshazzar. The message was true, and the appointed time was long, and he understood the message, that he had an understanding of the vision. Now God was going to reveal to Daniel some amazing details about the major world powers, beginning with the Medo-Persian Empire and continuing through to the time of the end, just prior to Christ's second coming. The angel that came to help Daniel understood the vision, told him that its focus was on what will happen to your people in the latter days, for the vision refers to many days yet to come. So, in the entire book of Daniel, when God, this is kind of like a teaching principle. When God wants to teach you something, he'll give you a verse, a couple verses, and then you begin to understand it, and then he'll add 2 or 3 more verses on top of that. So the teaching goes in layers. And in Daniel 8 and Daniel chapter 11, we call it the repetition and progressive layering. So you understand something from chapter 8. We understood the 4 kingdoms from Daniel chapter 2. And then when we looked at Daniel chapter 7, we say, well, here's these 4 empires again, but they're all in such detailed. And Daniel 7, okay, let's focus on Daniel 11 here, okay? Focus on what we're doing. Basically, they talk about layering the topic so that it becomes, you learn a little bit about it, and then all of a sudden when you get to chapter 7, after understanding chapter 2, you see it more detail, and the same thing happens with Daniel 8 and Daniel 11. What would happen to the people of God in Daniel's time and in the future was a great interest in him by these, as by then, 42,360 Jews had returned to Jerusalem following a decree by Cyrus allowing them to go back to their homeland. So the book of Ezra is a book of history about the Jewish people going back into their land. So in your notes that I'll be emailing out, this is probably the most helpful guideline about the prophecies in Daniel 11, the 5 rulers, and all of their names start with A. Ahasuerus from Daniel 11, verse 2, Alexander the Great, Antiochus the Third the Great, Antiochus the Fourth Epiphanes, and the Antichrist. We don't know when he will come, but we know that if the first 4 are predicted, the last one most certainly will be showing up on the scene. So that's how it breaks up. Then Daniel 11 reached all the way from the Persian Empire into the days of Antiochus Epiphanes and to the deployment of the Roman armies. Then this chapter takes a giant leap down the centuries to the end of times and gives us details about the reign of the Antichrist. So Daniel of 1 and 2 gives us the prophetic history of Persia. 3 to 20 foretells the history of Greece. 11 to 21 to 35 gives us history of Israel and their foe during the Maccabean times. That's the intertestamental times. And the Maccabean is the name for a Jewish family that ruled at the time to maintain their Jewish faith in times of the persecution from Antiochus Epiphanes the Fourth. Daniel 11, now from verse 36 to 45, forewarns the people of God that the last great evil one, the the Antichrist. This vision simply gave Daniel the words regarding what would happen to the Jewish people from the time forward, Daniel 7:9-9. Okay, so we start at verse 1 and 2. As for me, in the first year of the Darius the Mede, I stood up to confirm and strengthen him. And now I will show you the truth. So what's happening here is an angel is talking to Daniel, and the conversation is being recorded. In Daniel chapter 8, it was a vision, and the vision had apocalyptic terminology in it that we looked at. The same with Daniel 2, but this is like a prophetic word that from the one angel speaking to Daniel. Behold, there will be 3 more kings shall rise in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than all of them. And when he has become strong through his riches, he shall stir up all against the kingdom of Greece. Verse 2, the prophecy of Daniel 11 begins with the prediction that 3 more kings will arise in Persia by a 4th who would stir up against the realm of Greece. Regarding this verse, the Persian king who invaded Greece was, of course, Xerxes, who reigned 485 to 464 BC. Okay. Verse 3 and 4, then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion, and do as he wills. And as soon as he has arisen, his kingdom shall be broken and divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, but not to his posterity, nor according to the authority with which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be plucked up and go to others besides these. Who is this king? Alexander the Great. And you understood that because you were listening. And your dog told you some tips on the way. Yes. Daniel 3 and 4, appearance of a mighty king would be broken up and divided towards the 4 winds of heaven. Of course, it's Alexander the Great. We'll be noticing as we look at the history of Daniel chapter 11, that these kings and rulers poison each other when they want to kill each other. And I'm not sure what the potion is, but I think it's venom from snakes, or like, I don't want to get into rabbit hole, but I'm so tempted to. Verse 3 introduces us to the next phrase in world empires, the rise of Alexander the Great. Although this verse does not make it altogether clear that this mighty king would inaugurate a new empire in the place of the Persian one, verse 4 leaves us in no doubt that he was a ruler predicted here. Okay, in 7 or 8 years, he accomplished the most dazzling military conquest in human history. But he lived only 4 years more. He died at age 33. And after one of his drunken bouts, he died of a fever in 323 BC in Babylon. I think someone poisoned him, because they're just mean people back there. Verse 4 foretells the division of Alexander's domains among 4 smaller and weaker empires. So when that happens, there's a lot of instability in the land. After some years, they shall make an alliance, and the daughter of the king of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement, but she shall not retain the strength of her arm, and he and his arm shall not endure, but she shall be given up, and his attendants, he who fathered her and he who supported her in those times. History records that King Ptolemy of Egypt, so Egypt is down south, so when you read Daniel 11, the king of the south is Egypt, okay, gave his daughter Berenice to Antiochus II of Syria in order to seal an alliance between the 2 nations. But in time, Antiochus' first wife, an evil and power-hungry woman named Laodice, poisoned Antiochus and murdered Berenice and her son. The prophecy in verse 6 was explicitly fulfilled. So the only reason why we would look at this and say what's the purpose of this being in the Bible? This is only for us to know that God knows, as in God is in control of all the future from everyone's life. And I'm sure you could know that there are times that you could look back on your life and say, wow, God really was in charge of things. God has done things, and he's in charge. Okay, next. Verse 7, and from a branch from her roots one shall rise in his place. He shall come against the army and enter the fortress of the king of the north, and he shall deal with them and shall prevail. Ptolemy Euergetes organized a great expeditionary force against Syria in order to avenge his sister's death. The war raged from 246 to 241. Finally, he returned to Egypt laden with spoil. He succeeded on another front as well, and he reunited Cyrenakia at the western end of Libya with the Ptolemaic domains after it had been endured 12 years of independence. He also recovered all his father's conquest on the coast of the Asia Minor and temporarily gained control of some of the portions of Thrace. That is the land inhabited by which we now call Bulgaria and Romania, which back then was the region of Macedonia. He shall carry off to Egypt with their gods and their metal images and their precious vessels of silver and gold, and for years he shall refrain from attacking the king of the north. Ptolemy recovered the idols of Egypt taken from Cambis from 524 BC. Verse 9, Then the latter shall come into the realm of the king of the south and shall return to his own land. Although he did not enter Egypt itself, Seleucus had gained control over the northern Syria and Phoenicia. So all these, and the reason why this is in the Bible is because Israel is here and Egypt is down here and Syria is up here and all these kingdoms are fighting, and this is basically to let Daniel know this is what's going to happen in your neighborhood, in your neighboring provinces in the future. His son shall wage war and assemble a multitude of great forces, which shall keep coming and overflow and pass through, and again shall carry the war as far as his fortress. Then the king of the south, moved with rage, shall come out and fight against the king of the north, and he shall raise a great multitude, but it shall be given into his hand. And when the multitude is taken away, his heart shall be exalted, and he shall cast down tens of thousands, but he shall not prevail. This passage foretells an important new development in the struggle between the two great powers. With the advent of Antiochus the Great, Antiochus III, and his conquest of the Holy Land. Antiochus III next landed an expedition against Phoenicia and Palestine in 219-218 that ended in a serious setback at the Battle of Raphnia, where he was soundly beaten by the smaller army of Ptolemy IV. But finally in 203, Antiochus now had an opportunity to strike Egypt again, since Ptolemy IV had just died and had been succeeded by Ptolemy V. That's not on my breakfast cereal when I'm reading it in the morning. Who was a mere boy of 4 years old. Okay. Verse 13 to 16. These verses document the eventual wresting of the Holy Land from the Egyptian control by Antiochus the Great. Hoping to gain advantage over Egypt, Antiochus the Great gave his daughter Cleopatra, not from the movies, okay, it's not that one, in marriage to Ptolemy in 195 BC. But Antiochus' daughter sided with her husband, and no advantage was gained. Antiochus then lost a battle against Roman forces. After his defeat, he had to surrender his entire elephant brigade, all his navy, and 20 selected hostages. Finally, he was obliged to pay an indemnity of 15,000 or 20,000 talents over a period of several years. Antiochus' second son, who was named after him, was among the 20 hostages taken to Rome, where he spent the formative years of his life. He later became the dreaded persecutor of the Jews, Antiochus Epiphanes, the madman. Being unable to make his indemnity payments, Antiochus the Great was killed while trying to pillage a temple in Elamias. This was the state in Persia that descended from the Elamites. Being unable to make his indemnity payments, Antiochus the Great was killed while trying to pillage the temple in Elamias. This was a state in Persia that descended from the Elamites. Armies that shall be utterly swept before him and broken, even the prince of the covenant. And from the time that an alliance is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, and he shall become strong with a small people. Without warning, he shall come into the richest part of the province. He shall do what neither his fathers nor his fathers have done, scattering among them plunder, spoil, and goods. He shall devise plans against strongholds, but only for a time. And he shall stir up his power and his heart against the king of the south with a great army. And the king of the south shall wage war with an exceedingly great and mighty army, but he shall not stand. For a plot shall be devised against him, even those who eat his food shall break him. His armies shall be swept away, and the many shall fall down slain. And as for the two kings, their hearts shall be bent on doing evil. They shall speak lies at the same table, but to no avail, for the end is yet to be at the time appointed. He shall act deceitfully. The angel told Daniel that the new king of the north, the vile person of verse 21, would attempt a deceitful covenant with the king of the south. This would fail, and there would be a great battle that would not change the balance of power. He shall stir up his power. This was fulfilled when Antiochus Epiphanes carried on the feud between the dynasties, but pretended friendship and alliance to catch them off guard. Despite massive efforts and epic battles, Antiochus Epiphanes did not stand, and his army was swept away. The defeat of Antiochus Epiphanes and his second campaign against Egypt was important because Egypt beat Antiochus with the help of Rome. At the end of it all, Antiochus Epiphanes and his kingdom were under the domain of Rome. I like this paragraph. In a famous battle, the Roman army defeated the navy of Antiochus Epiphanes. After the battle, a Roman general drew a circle around Antiochus in the dirt and demanded to know if he would surrender and pay tribute to Rome, and demanded to know that before he stepped out of that circle. From that point on, there was no doubt Antiochus Epiphanes took his orders from Rome and under Rome's dominion. Those who eat of the portions of their delicacies shall destroy him. This was fulfilled in the treachery against Antiochus IV by his own counselors. So if you're a miserable, kind of a deceitful guy, you're going to have the same company, and it's going to fall back on you. 28 to 34. And he shall return to his land with great wealth, but his heart shall be set up against the holy covenant. You can see his personality is just like the Antichrist, which we have not seen yet, but his characteristics and his actions and his attitude and his actions represent that of the Antichrist, because it builds like a crescendo. It's coming to the end of the chapter here. He shall set against the holy covenant. He shall work his will and return to his own land. At the time appointed he shall return and come into the south, but it shall not be this time as it were before. For ships of Kittim, that's Roman ships, shall come against him, and he shall be afraid and withdraw, and shall turn back and be enraged and take action against the holy covenant. He shall turn back and pay attention to those who forsake the holy covenant. Forces from him shall appear and profane the temple and fortress, and shall take away the regular burnt offerings, and shall be set up the abomination that makes desolate. He shall seduce with flattery those who violate the covenant, but the people who know their God will stand firm and take action. And the wise among the people shall make many understand, though for many days they shall stumble by the sword and flame, by captivity and plunder. When they stumble, they shall receive a little help, and many shall join themselves to them with flattery. When the vile person returned to his land, he would attack the land, people, and temple of Israel. It will be a time of great courage for the great treachery among the people of God. This was fulfilled when Antiochus Epiphanes returned from Egypt, bitter from defeat. He vented his anger against Jerusalem, which was already shaken because Antiochus sold the office of the high priest and persecuted the Jewish people to conform to Greek culture, forsaking faith and tradition and their forefathers. Failing in his invasion of Egypt, Antiochus returned home with only a great plunder to soothe his wounded pride. For the ships of Kittim, Romans, shall come against them. This was the naval assistance from the Romans who helped the Egyptians turn back the Antiochus Epiphanes. And they shall set up the abomination that makes desolate. Antiochus Epiphanes set up the image of Zeus at the temple altar. He demanded sacrifice to this image. Now this is an echo of Revelation chapter 13, which we are aware of. And later desecrated the temple by sacrificing a pig on it. It was in truth an abomination which brought a desolate condition to the temple, for now no one would come to worship it at all. He shall seduce with flattery those who violate the covenant, but the people who know their God shall be strong. When Antiochus Epiphanes turned on Jerusalem, the Jewish people were divided. Some forsook their covenant with God and embraced the Greek culture. Those who knew their God made a stand for righteousness in the face of incredible persecution. For many days they shall fall by the sword and flame, by captivity. In his attack on Jerusalem, Antiochus IV is said to have killed 80,000 Jews, taken 40,000 more as prisoners, and sold another 40,000 as slaves. He also plundered the temple, robbing it of approximately 1 billion worth of by modern calculations. So, okay, that's his actions. Verse 36 to 45 forewarns the people of God in the last great evil one, the Antichrist. Taken as a whole, 11:36 to 45 is a description of the closing days of the times of the Gentiles, specifically the Great Tribulation with its one world ruler, world religion, and materialistic philosophy. In spite of its satanic support, the world government fragmentizes into sectional disputes with Great World War, which climaxes with the second coming of Christ. This will bring the times of the Gentiles to a close, along with the destruction of the wicked rulers who led it. And the king shall do as he wills. He shall exalt himself and shall magnify himself above every god. This is where the Apostle Paul gets his verse in Thessalonians about Ray. And shall speak astonishing things against the God of gods. He shall prosper till the indignation is accomplished, for what is decreed shall be done. He shall exalt and magnify himself above every god. The angel explained to Daniel that this king would blaspheme God and exalt himself until the wrath has been accomplished and what has been determined shall be done. We know that everything about this prophecy was not fulfilled during the career of the Antiochus Epiphanes. Jesus specifically said the real abomination of desolation was still in the future in Matthew 24:15. The Antichrist will have the power to do as he pleases. Apparently, he will not be subject to a higher human authority. So these verses go back to 7:23 and Revelation 13. He will exalt himself higher than any other god, which implies he will demand worship. This is where Paul gets that a quote from 1st, 2nd Thessalonians 2-4, and the other verses in Revelation. The Apostle Paul paraphrased verse 35 in reference to the coming Antichrist. Let no one deceive you by any means, for that day will not come unless the falling away comes first. Like, I've heard that so many times, the falling away, and I don't know if we have even seen that yet, but it says it will happen. And the man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. And he shall pay no attention to the gods of his fathers, or to the one beloved by woman. He shall not pay attention to any other god, for he shall magnify himself above all. This verse gives more information about the ruler's religious convictions. The phrase, the God of his fathers, is similar to that which occurs elsewhere in Scripture, describing God of the Jews in Exodus, etc. This has led some to conclude that the Antichrist will be a Jew. And the other expression in that verse 37 says, he will not give attention to the one beloved by women. Some commentators say that all the women in Israel wanted to become the mother of the Messiah. So that was the expression of being beloved by women. They would say, oh, you gave birth to the Messiah, you're beloved of women. But the Antichrist, no, I don't think so. The identity of the one beloved of woman, okay, see, I keep doing this all the time. I keep going, okay, is difficult to understand. Some believe that the meaning is that the Antichrist has no desire for women. Some even speculate that he will be abusive towards women. In other words, he will be devoid of natural affection. Well, we can see that. He shall honor the God of fortresses instead of these, a God whom his fathers did not know. He shall honor with gold and silver and with precious stones and costly gifts. What this king will really trust in is a God whom he believes can give him a military success. He will probably idolize power. His forefathers typically acknowledged some supreme being or some pagan god or gods. He will honor his God by spending money to build his military arsenal. In other words, he will be a materialist. He shall deal with the strongest fortresses and with the help of a foreign god. Those who acknowledge him he shall load with honor. He will make them rulers with many and shall divide the land for a price. The foreign god referred to in this verse may be the god of military might mentioned in verse 38. Alternatively, it may be some other foreign god that he used for his own ends, or maybe even himself. As Antiochus before him, this ruler will reward those who are loyal to him, and he will support them by bestowing honors and positions of authority on them. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack them, but the king of the north shall rush upon him like a whirlwind, with chariots and horsemen, and many ships, and he shall come into the countries and overflow, pass through. So this verse, there's speculation that there's a tie-in here of, when you read chapter Ezekiel 38, 37, 38, Ezekiel described a great military force descending on Israel from the far north in the future. Ezekiel 38, 39, Ezekiel did not mention a power from the south. Part of the fulfillment of Ezekiel's prophecy is probably the same invasion that Daniel recorded here. It seems that part of what Ezekiel prophesied to take place in his description of the battle of Gog and Magog will find fulfillment at the end of the tribulation. The aspects of the fulfillment described in the present verse will probably occur towards the end of the second half of the tribulation, when Israel is suffering intense persecution. He shall come into the glorious land, and tens of thousands shall fall, but these shall be delivered out of his hand, Edom and Moab and a main part of the Ammonites. The Antichrist will also enter Palestine, and many there will fall before his forces. He will defeat other countries in addition to Israel. He'll probably enter Palestine after he breaks his covenant with Israel. That's referring to 927, and which would confirm that these events will happen in the second half of the tribulation. There will be a few areas that the Antichrist does not overpower, however, namely those that are former territories of Edom, Moab, and Ammon. These nations were to the east and the south of Israel. Today, Jordan occupies this region. He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall bring ruler of the treasures of gold and of silver, and all of the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Cushites shall follow in his train. This ruler will then press his attack and invade other countries, particularly Egypt, which will fall to his control. He will plunder the treasures of Egypt and will bring those living into the ancient territories of Libya and Ethiopia under his control. Libya lay to the west of Egypt and Ethiopia to the south. Verse 44-45. But news from the east and from the north shall alarm him, and he shall go out with a great fury to destroy and devote many to destruction. And he shall pitch his palatal tents between the sea and the glorious holy mountain. He shall come to his end with none to help him. I like that last couple words. The NIV translation at the glorious holy mountain confirms this location, since Jerusalem stands on a mountain. When you read sentences, you got to read, there's a period coming. So you say, because since Jerusalem stands on a mountain, period. Good. It is evidently there that Antichrist will meet his match and suffer defeat. Later, Revelations say that Jesus Christ will return to the Mount of Olives from heaven and destroy him. Acts 1, Revelation 19, and Zechariah 14, 2-4. There should have been no break between the end of chapters at the end of chapter 11 and 12. Chapter 12 has its high point in the vision that began in chapter 10. In this last chapter, we have the climax of the Great Tribulation and the resurrection that follows. The first 4 verses of chapter 12 are the completion of the longer section that started in chapter 10. Chapter 12, the time of trouble destined for Israel. That's not meant to be a break. That's meant to give you a breather and realize we're still in this and everything's okay. Verse 1 of chapter 12. At that time Michael shall stand up, and the great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people. There shall be a time of trouble such as there is never since there was a nation, even to that time. So that's a verse describing what the tribulation is going to be like, a time of trouble. At that time, this ties chapter 12 to the last verse of chapter 11. Michael shall stand up. The angel Michael is often associated with spiritual battle. Daniel 10:13, 10:21, Jude 1:9, and Revelation 12:7. Since Michael is called the archangel, he is Satan's true opposite. Satan is not the opposite of Jesus. He is the opposite of Michael, the high-ranking angel. The great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people, in addition to his role as spiritual warrior, Michael has a special job in protecting Israel. God appointed Michael as a spiritual guardian over Israel. There shall be a time of trouble. This refers to the time of persecution for Israel and world calamity known as the Great Tribulation. This period also is called the time of Jacob's trouble in Jeremiah 30, verse 7. Such as never was since there was a nation even to that time. The Jewish people have known many a time of trouble through their history, from the horrors of the fall of Samaria and Jerusalem to the terrors wrought by Antiochus Epiphanes, to the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans, to the persecutions from the church during the Dark Ages, and the pogroms of Europe, Okay, to the 20th century Holocaust, it often seems that all Israel's history has been a time of trouble. Yet this time of trouble will be different. There will be a worse time of trouble than Israel has ever seen before. Jesus quoted this passage in Matthew 24. For then there will be great tribulation, such as not since the beginning of the world until this time, not even shall there ever be. With great sadness, we must say that the Bible teaches that the worst has yet to come for Israel and the people of the Jewish people. Revelation 12:13-17 teaches us that what makes this time of terror so terrible. It describes the fury of the devil directed against the Jewish people during this time. The trumpets, seals, and bowls of Revelation all describe the horrific conditions of the world in general during this time. The Jewish people will be targets of the full fury of the devil and his Antichrist during this period, and will live in a world that is is in an incredible upheaval because of the judgment of God. Verse 2, at that time your people shall be delivered, yet everyone who is found written in the book. That's also referred to the book of life. At that time, people shall be delivered. Despite the terrors of that time, deliverance is assured. No matter how great the attack is against the Jewish people, God promises to preserve them. He will never break his promise to Abraham. And I will establish my covenant between me and you and your descendants after you in your generation, for an everlasting covenant to be God to you and your descendants after you. Genesis 17:7. Everyone who is found written in the book, God will use the tribulation period to sift the faithful Jews from those who are unfaithful. That is the primary focus of the tribulation. It's not to reform bad Christians into good Christians, and all the other ideas that you've probably heard. Those who are left at the end of time will reign with him. The resurrection of the dead. Many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake. By the end of the tribulation period, all the righteous dead will be resurrected to life. Some to everlasting life and some to shame and everlasting contempt. The Bible clearly teaches two resurrections, but the resurrection of the unrighteous won't occur until the end of the millennium. See Revelation 20, verse 5, 13-14. There's a lot of verses, if I were to quote all these verses, we'd be here till 11:59 every Wednesday night. Those who are wise, this is one of my favorite verses. I probably have a few, but this is one of my favorite verses that gives me motivation to share God's word on the internet, online, staying connected, all these different things. Do you know that this study of Daniel has been sent? I sent it to a friend that I met in Africa and Kenya, and he's a preacher in one of the churches there. His name is Hubron, and he's an evangelist, and he's got my whole series of Daniel 1-12, and he's using it to preach. And his brother got saved, and so I'm thinking, Lord, you're amazing. You can do amazing things. And then I asked, he says, can you send me some Bibles? He wants them in Swahili and English. And I went to the Canadian Bible Society, emailed them, found their address on the internet, and they replied. I said, can you send some Bible? I'll give you he gave me his address, where to send them to. And the Canadian Bible Society, or the Gideon said, the Gideon Society said, we don't send Bibles out like what you're asking. They set up their political structure so that if you're a member of the Gideons, you are the bearer of the Bible news. So they don't send it out like that. So now I'm still looking for different places that are resources. And one of the challenges of being online with staying connected, the website that I started up on Facebook, is the amount of people who want to become friends with me is over 480 up to 500 people, and between 75 and 85% of them are African people from third world countries, and Pakistan broke off with India years ago, and Pakistan is 99% Muslim. And so there's a guy in Pakistan they have it tough there. They really do. And when you start connecting with someone and saying, hi, how's you doing, right? What happens in every situation, and inevitably this will happen, the disparity between their economic condition and yours will surface. And they will say, send me money. And that is difficult because, number one, I have a difficult time, very difficult time, to accept a friend for someone who has a Facebook identity and their name, my name is my name in my Facebook profile, but their name is not their name, but part of it, but it's a long string of numbers. So that means their original name has been changed to something else, which means it lies suspect to a hacker, someone who's trying to play games and tricks on the internet. And I'm glad the online hasn't been hacked by anyone, but it gets awfully close sometimes. And anyways, that's just one of the things. But anyways, those who turn many to righteousness shall shine like the stars forever and ever. This verse in its original context is referring to, if you're in the tribulation, your whole life in your whole day is not going to work and coming home again and finding a scrap of food to eat. Your whole motivation will be to win souls for God at the end time, because the only thing that matters is your soul is either going to be in heaven's gates or it's going to be in hell's fire. That's the end destiny here. So the word wise in this passage is describing teachers, individuals who have insight into the times and impart to others. There will be those who will encourage God's people during this terrible time. Sorry, I was preaching there. I got to stay calm here. Forever and ever, the brightness of God's wise ones and those who turn many to righteousness will last forever. It isn't fading, it endures with so many other things that we put our effort into. Even if they succeed, give only a temporary shine. It is worth it to invest our lives into the things that last forever and ever. If you want to plant something that will last a year, plant a flower. If you want to plant something that will last a lifetime, plant a tree. If you want to plant something that will last forever, plant the gospel into someone's life. And next slide, please. But you, Daniel, shut up the words, and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. Many take this prediction as being fulfilled in the travel run to and fro. As information explosions, knowledge shall increase. We have ChatGPT now and AI, all that stuff of our modern age. There's nothing like that in a tribulation that will spur one's attention to Bible prophecy. If you're in the tribulation and someone handed you a Bible and they said, well, this is what we're going through right now, their eyes are going to be peeled on those pages and they're going to be reading and they want to find out, how can I get my life right with God? Hopefully. The phrase run to and fro when connected with the book means to let one's eyes run to and fro. That is to diligently pursue the words on a page. Those alive during the tribulation will read, reread, and check on what they have read so as to ponder these words diligently. And in the process of such searching, knowledge shall be increased. While nations are plotting against each other, while much blood is being shed all over the world, people will be searching for answers to why there is such great sufferings and sorrow. Then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, two others stood, one on this bank of the stream and one on the bank of the other stream, And someone said to the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the stream, how long will it be till the end of these wonders? And I heard the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the stream. He raised his right hand and his left toward heaven, and swore by him who lives forever that it will be for a time, times, and half a time. How long is that? 3.5 years. and that when the shattering of the power of the holy people comes to an end, all these things would be finished. I heard, but I did not understand. Then I said, O my Lord, what shall be the outcome of these things? Daniel was begging to know more about these things, which will happen before the end. But the details weren't for Daniel to know. Gabriel told him in. He said, Go your way, Daniel, for the words are shut up and sealed until the times of the end. The angel told Daniel not to waste time delving more deeply into these prophecies. It seems to be that was one of Daniel's expertise. There's an interesting verse in Ezekiel chapter 28, verse 3, where they're referring to the king of Tyre, and he's a representation of Satan, and he's really cocky and really smart. And the verse says, "So you think you're just as smart as Daniel?" is the verse, and this comes through Daniel. He really was a smart man in the Old Testament, as you can tell by his understanding of and his compositions of the book of Daniel. But Daniel did not, the angel told Daniel not to waste time delving more deeply into these prophecies. They simply wouldn't be fully understood until the time to pass. In the meantime, Daniel had his own work to do. He was to accept the mystery of what he had been given and to get on with his life. Many shall purify themselves and make themselves white and be refined, but the wicked shall act wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but those who are wise shall understand. The angel explained that while the sufferings would harden some in their wickedness, those some afflictions would result in a remnant being purified and cleansed. And from the time that the regular burnt offerings is taken away, and the abomination that makes desolate is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Blessed is he who waits and arrives at the 1335 days. Oh my goodness. These verses are filled with mystery. Having established in his prophecy the importance of 1,260 days as a mark of the Great Tribulation, the angel now introduced two additional numbers that seem to have no reference point. First, he told Daniel that from the abomination of desolation there would be 1,290 days. That's 30 more than the established 1,260 days. What's the significance of the extra days? Explanation from Leon Wood. It may be a time necessary for the setting up of the governmental machinery for carrying out the rule of Christ. The true and full border of Israel from the river of Egypt to the Euphrates, Genesis 15:18, will have to be established, and the appointments made of those aiding in the government. That makes sense. It makes logical sense. But go your way till the end, and you shall rest and shall stand in your plotted place at the end of days. For the third time in these verses, the angel spoke personally to Daniel and instructed him to go about his duties and responsibilities. He was told to protect the prophecy and proceed with his life. He is being told to prepare for the future. Daniel lived a long and productive life, but as we come to the end of his story, it's apparent that for him it should be for any followers of Christ that the best is yet to come. Daniel was told to seal up the prophecy and preserve it for a future day when it would be needed. We have been blessed to study the book of Daniel because it has been preserved. How can we preserve the words of Daniel's prophecy? We can read them, study them, and obey them. We can teach our children the importance of the understanding of the prophetic sections of Scripture. Someday soon the Lord is going to return for his saints, and immediately the prophecies will be studied in Daniel will begin to unfold as the 7 years of the tribulation begins. But besides this, you know the times that the hour has come for you to wake from sleep, for the salvation is nearer to us now than we ever first believed. The night is far gone, the day is at hand. So that let us cast off the works of the darkness and put on the armor of light. Good advice. To Taking all these together, we are obviously dealing with the last half of Daniel's 70th week at the Great Tribulation, and we know very little about the first half. When the power of the holy people have been completely shattered, all these things shall be finished. The people of Israel will seem completely crushed as these things end, but at that time the Messiah with whom they will trust before he returns, will return to rescue them. Although I heard, I did not understand. Then I said, My Lord, what shall be the end of these things? Although I heard, I did not understand. This comforts us. Daniel didn't understand it all either, even though he heard it firsthand. Many shall be purified, made white, and refined, but the wicked shall do wickedly. This looks like to be referencing to what's going to happen at the end times, at the end of the tribulation. None of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. And from the time that the daily sacrifice is taken away and the abomination of desolation is set up, there will be 1,290 days. Blessed is he who waits and comes to the 1,335 days. But you go your way until the end, for you shall rest, and will arise to your inheritance at the end of the days. Go your way, Daniel. The command is to go your way is literally merely go, but it is not meant physically. The angel told Daniel to make a mental departure from the questioning. More details will be revealed later, but Daniel must be content with what God has revealed thus far. For the words are closed up and sealed until the time of the end. Daniel must make a mental departure from his questioning, because the revealing of these things will not come till the time of the end. Until then, there is a sense in which these prophecies are closed up and sealed. Is that it?